Hey everybody, it's been a minute since I've uploaded a vlog. I have been really busy with work and life and just lots of things going on. So I apologize that I haven't really been as active on YouTube as I would have hoped. But today it is Saturday, March 25th at the time of me recording this, and I wanted to make a point today about sitting down and recording something. I was going to film something outside, but it is a little rainy and dreary and snowy out right now in Chicago. The light you're seeing is actually a desk lamp illuminated on me. It is not the sun. This little trick in the business we like to call movie magic. I've been well, for those of you who are thinking about me out there on the internet. I've been thinking a lot about, sort of like life and my place in it, and how the internet and these YouTube videos like Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, all these wonderful places people follow me on are just like little time capsules, and I'm kind of like chipping away and hopefully putting something somewhere out there that will last. That's been on my mind a lot recently, and it hasn't helped that yesterday I went to my dentist, and it's the first time I've ever heard a medical professional tell me that I'm not getting any younger. That was my dentist's exact words. So, yeah, that's definitely really great for the good old 30-year-old confidence. The reason he said this is so all right, here we go. This is going to be really gross, and you guys are going to get to know me really, really well. But, I don't know how well you can see it. I got these, big buck teeth, and they're kind of, translucent a little bit at the bottom here. I'll see if I can get the camera to focus on that. So, the reason, at least that I have been told, that they're a little bit translucent. It's not painful or anything, but it's I have a very deep bite, and I'm slowly wearing away my enamel. So now I have to wear a night guard when I sleep, and I have to hum a lot more to make sure I don't wear it down anymore. But I'm in the very, very early stages of it, so that is that, Speaking of biting stuff, I wanted to take a moment and talk to you guys about the book that I wrote, Vampires. Here's my plug. I am shilling myself. Buy my merch. Buy it now. But yeah, I have, to those of you who have already bought Vampires and who have read it, thank you. That means the world to me. For those of you who haven't read my book, it is available on Amazon. It is available on Kindle. It's available in paperback and hardcover. So you can definitely pick those up. If you're on Amazon Prime, it makes it pretty easy. One of the reasons I chose Amazon was sort of the accessibility. I feel like a lot of people have Amazon accounts, and it's just, a good way to foster an audience. I've got 4 copies here with me that I'm going to sign and hide away in Chicago. There's a couple of free lending libraries nearby. If you're around Dover Street, Sunnyside Mall, Leland Avenue, or Wilson, you might find these 4 copies stashed away there for your use and enjoyment and reading. But what is Vampires? Contrary to popular belief, there are no actual vampires in this novel. So if you're looking for sexy Twilight, campy vampirism, it's not that. I was always kind of inspired by this idea of the tragedy vampire is how I would sort of start describing this. And there are people who show up at crime scenes and are just kind of tourists there. And it's even a legitimate industry. Up in Wisconsin, there's Jeffrey Dahmer tours. Here in Chicago, Illinois, where I live, there's gangster tours, and you can go and look at these sites that these horrific crimes happened. And that was always so fascinating to me, that we like to take this beautiful sort of world that we live in, and it's filled with rocks, and sometimes we like to pick up a rock and look at the bottom of the rock, and it's covered in bugs and beetles and gross stuff. and that sort of fascination with, you know, violence and a fetishization, excuse me, of violence. So I decided to like see if there's anything out there to like take that to its most extreme, you know, because like as a millennial, you know, like everyone listens to like true crime podcasts. Like I feel like everyone loves like horror movies. Like violence has definitely been fetishized, especially in like, you know, movies, video games, like everything. So I was like just kind of trolling Reddit and like, you know, Twitter one day, and I saw that there was like a community of people that were like writing and selling, you know, like serial killer fan fiction, like Jeffrey Dahmer fan fiction, uh, John Wayne Gacy fan fiction, like Ted Bundy fan fiction, and I was like, there's no way this is real. You know, I saw that thread and I was like, this is not a real thing. This has to be bait, or, you know, like a creepy pasta, or, you know, like a shock value or something. And sure enough, it was not fake. It was real. And as like sort of an artist and creator myself, I was like, how good can this writing be? I love books. I have like shelves of them behind the camera. I might show them to you guys later, but I don't want to like come off that I'm like bragging and be like, look at these books I have. But anyway, back to sort of like peril fetishism, which is like kind of like an umbrella term for this community. I ended up reading a couple of these like stories just to see, because I thought they would be like the lowest of the low, kind of like Harlequin romance novel, or like just pure smut novel. And some of them were actually quite good. And I was like, okay, like this is really kind of like something. I was like, there's something here. And vampires existed in my head for about probably since like 2015, but I didn't start writing it until like really seriously start writing it to like end of 2017, early 2018 is when I like really sat down with like all these notes and outlines that I had and actually began writing the book. And kind of the sort of inspiration for vampires, kind of, if you guys will allow me to open up a little bit, I, you know, have suffered with like anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder for a lot of my life. I'm kind of on the tail end of, you know, the plague of it, if you will. Like I've kind of, you know, adapted to it and like learned, you know, to meditate and like be mindful and cognitive behavioral, sorry, I can't talk today. Cognitive behavioral therapy to kind of, you know, work through things when it flares up. But without going into too much like gruesome detail, you know, with obsessive compulsive disorder, typically you have like an obsession. And if you don't act on the obsession, you get punished with like really triggering, you know, awful thoughts essentially. Or, you know, images. Maybe some people hallucinate. I have not had that experience. But my sort of punishing thought was always that I would like lose control and like murder gruesomely like people that I love and like care a lot about. And I always was trying to find ways to like combat that. Like I got really into like weapons for a while. I still like swords and like collect swords and stuff. But, you know, I was kind of like using sort of these like collection ideas around like death and like violence as a way to kind of like cope with that. And I was always like so fascinated, I guess, with the fact that there are people out there who like make fetishistic, like intentionally sexual art about like murder and dying and death. Like just go to DeviantArt. I think I name dropped DeviantArt in the book. You know, just like look up any, you know, there's like images, like poems, like all sorts of like really insane. I'm sorry, I don't want to say insane, but like really interesting. It was really interesting out there stuff that like people make. And I, you know, who kind of had this like fear of murder and like death and like killing, I was like, you know, what would it be like to put myself in the shoes of someone who finds that erotic, like kind of that like psychotic like serial killer mindset. So out of that, Brian Stanhope, my main character in Vampires, was born. Brian, when I initially wrote Brian, I remember I wanted to write like a character that I really, really despised. And because like there's this thing in writing, I feel like where authors really like put themselves in their characters, and I think that is intentional and unintentional. I definitely put a lot of myself into Brian, but I wanted to make, kind of this like, really predatory kind of guy. But he's predatory, but he's also like not quite to the sort of serial killer level yet. Like I don't think he's ever harmed anybody intentionally, like truly. And I ended up really loving him a lot, which is, I think, just the fact that I spent so much time with him and so much time in his head. And what I'm going to say may sound moronic, but I wanted to write a book about like men for men, because if you look out into the world, I feel like there is a lot of like problems plaguing men that like people just don't talk about. Uh, let me put it this way. I mean, a lot of people point to men's mental health. I would agree. It's like people like think you're like a pussy if you cry, or if you get angry you're just a hothead and like violent. It's like so much in society I feel like devalues like masculine emotions and expressions of emotion from men, and people are kind of like pressured into staying in their lane. And by people I mean men and women as well, of course. But there's just like when men get lonely, it often gets very destructive. I mean, just look at all these guys online who flock to people like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate, or hell, even like, Sam Hyde, like people who are just shilling this like toxic, like sort of self-reliance, I would call it, but it's not even like toxic self-reliance. It's just like this old-fashioned like kind of stereotype that is just being peddled in an effort to piss off, women. Like, I hate to say it, but there is just this kind of like thing in our world where it's like guys will often just be conservative solely for the fact of being contradictory. It's a lot like being, it's a lot like people. A lot of people, I don't want to say everybody and make like a blatant statement, but a lot of people, get into things like Satanism or even polyamory just to be contradictory, like just to be, just to like be a middle finger. And a lot of guys I know fall into that. A lot of guys just like, it's like someone really hurts them once, I think, or maybe life just hurts them once, and then they're kind of set down this like dark path. And that's kind of what happens to my main character in this book. He undergoes a couple of traumatic events, some self-inflicted and some not. And, ends up being this kind of like literal undead being, like just profiting off of predation, which I find to be incredibly fascinating. I wrote vampires to take place in my hometown that I grew up in, Monroe, Michigan, which, if you've never been to Michigan out there, I highly recommend it. I really love it. It's very beautiful. It's kind of like on an upbound, like now. I definitely wrote this from sort of my memories of being in high school, where Michigan was very much in like a downward spiral. And large parts of Michigan, I think to this day, are very much like liminal spaces. Like you can go to like parts of Detroit, for a really good example, or even Ann Arbor, and there's just like these rundown like abandoned factories back from when America was kind of like an industrial nation that we have since moved away from and outsourced. And these sort of masculine ideals like are kind of put to the wayside, and people like don't know how to deal with that and don't know how to operate, I think, anymore in that space. And people seek validation, numerically validation, through likes, retweets, shares, views on social media. And people are ashamed by like doing things that I don't think they need to be ashamed about. Like, all right, full disclosure, I'm not apparel fetishist, but if you're out there, writing stuff like Brian writes, you do you. You are doing something important. And I really believe that, it's just such a strange world that we live in. And I wanted to like carve out this like piece of it and like really deep dive into it and really explore it. I'm very, inspired by the works of David Lynch, who is, an incredible surrealist filmmaker. Uh, and I kind of wanted to like unintentionally almost like sort of capture that sort of small town atmosphere, because I don't think there are any stories really that take place in Monroe. I mean, I'm sure there are that I just haven't like come across yet. I know Michigan is kind of on the up and up as far as like a horror setting, and I'm kind of really honored and glad to be part of that cusp. And I really do love Monroe, which is something someone said. It's like, for as much as your characters talk shit about the town that they live in, you love it. And I kind of do. Like, it's always going to have like a place in my heart, just this sort of, you know, like I said, kind of like a Twilight Empire, if you will, a world on the decline. I've kind of, rambled on way too long. So if you're still watching this, and if any of this sounds like interesting, like the idea of, I don't even think I've even said what the plot of the book is really about. I've given you ideas and like phrases. So here you go. You're kind of getting a look into how my mind works and how I think and like what my thoughts are, which is, such a miracle of the internet, going back to that. But anyway, so Vampires, it's about a guy, his name's Brian Stanhope. He is a peril fetishist writer who writes serial killer fan fiction, and he is framed wrongly for a crime. And, I talk a lot about sort of like police corruption as well, and the fact that so many murder cases are built on circumstantial evidence, which is, let's be real, if you were like, a serial killer fan fiction, writer, and you were the suspect of a crime, and the police find all this like murder smut you've written, yeah, they're not gonna look too hard into other avenues. Let's put it that way. But it's a story about men. It's a story about women. It's a story about loving yourself and moving on from trauma. And it's a story about acceptance, which is something I think that's really important in, just not just cognitive behavioral therapy, which the book definitely draws a lot of insight from, but something I think that is so important in all of our lives, no matter what you do. Like if you're an artist like me, if you're, a content creator, if you are, working at McDonald's, if you're a corporate executive, if you're, a production assistant on a film, my most important advice to you would be, there's only one person you have to like love, and it's yourself. And that may sound very negative, because you should love others, of course. But if you are walking around with like self-hatred, and believe me, I think we all do to some extent, you have to learn to love and make peace with like the things about yourself that you find uncomfortable. You just have to like, I'm stealing this, from Matthew McConaughey, an interview he did, but there's this image that he uses where it's, there's a demon in your head, and that's kind of all the things that you don't like about yourself. Maybe it's like, mental illness, or maybe, it's like you feel like you're lazy, or maybe you have no ambition, or maybe you just feel lost in the world. Or maybe, something really bad happened to you, and it's like, fucking you up. But the thing is you have to shake hands with those demons and make peace with them. Because at the end of the day, the only other person in your head is you. And that's so important, is to like love yourself and like radically accept yourself. Maybe not to the extent of like actually committing violence. I don't condone that. But yeah, sorry guys. I am just really doing this off the cuff, really trying to be raw. Is sort of like, kind of like what the book is. Like I felt the book is very raw, and maybe this video is very raw, and the style of videos I like is like very raw. Like maybe that's just a product of my time. I grew up on a time where like vlogs were just like people rambling, So anyway, it's a beautiful Saturday. Well, not in Chicago, but maybe where you are, it's a beautiful Saturday. And it's a beautiful world, no matter what weather it is. So I hope you're out there. I hope you are out there having fun and a good time. And if you enjoyed this vlog, please leave a like and subscribe. I will leave a link in the description to where you can buy Vampires. Once again, it's on Amazon, Kindle, paperback and hardcover. Yeah, if you liked this vlog and want to hear more about vampires and maybe hear more about my writing process or like what it was like self-publishing or what it was like, winning a award. Well, I was a finalist. I didn't win. But if you want to know more about like book contests or anything like that, please let me know. I appreciate you guys sticking around and just letting me experiment with like the kind of content I'm going to make. And yeah, this may be a little bare bones, but I hope you found it interesting at the very least. If you're out there, have a good day. Later.